We've seen coral survivorship ranging from 30 to 77 to 84 to 98%
Wow.
across some of our restoration sites in the Bahamas. For context, most restoration projects in the Caribbean, if you have 30 to 50% after 1 year, is considered a successful project. So our worst project was still successful. We had twofold increases in fish life populations.
Oh, wow.
We've seen really meaningful figures and just forget about figures being in the water and seeing more life coming back to these places. So from the Bahamas, we're now actually working in Dubai. We've partnered with Saudi's leading university, the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, and are doing work on the Red Sea.
Welcome to Becoming Radical, the podcast for creators, builders, and dreamers just like you. What does it mean to become radical in a world of constant change? Hosted by Michael Gaizutis, each week we'll explore the real-time journeys of those rewriting the rules. From untold failures to groundbreaking success. If you're ready to break the boundaries of limited thinking, this is your guide to unlimited growth.
Welcome to Becoming Radical. Excited to have everybody here again today. Today, we are joined by Sam Teicher. Sam, it is great to meet you and have you here today. Sam is the co-founder and CEO of Coral Vita. I'm so excited you're here with us. I know we had a couple of minutes of chit-chat before this show, but really, really keen to get to know you and share your story.
Thanks for having me on, Michael. It's a pleasure and looking forward to sharing that story.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. So, a good starting point is, we talked about this a little bit just a couple minutes ago, but what really inspired you to start Coral Vita? Was there a specific moment where, you thought the ocean's health felt personal to you, based on your experiences, your story, your journey? What was that pivotal moment for you?
Well, like most native Washington, D.C. kids, I grew up dreaming of being a coral farmer.
Yeah.
I did not. It was a job I didn't even know existed. And it's also, frankly, a job that shouldn't exist, but we live in a world where we got to take care of the ecosystems that take care of all of us. I fell in love with nature really when I was a kid, rolling over logs in my parents' backyard, hiking in the Shenandoahs, going fishing. Nice. And I still remember the first time I saw a coral reef, I was 6 years old.
Wow.
And it's just the dazzling array of colors and creatures and shapes. Just still, I can see that right now as we're talking.
Yeah.
And as soon as I was old enough, my parents got me, as well as my brother, scuba certification. So just have experienced that underwater world for the majority of my life. And that was something that I loved, but certainly was not something I saw a profession in. And with that in mind, I had a sort of environmental tilt within my studies. And ultimately, that took me to starting a coral restoration company many years later.
That's incredible. Really cool. I think when we have those moments when we're young, they can be positively impactful, especially in this scenario, right? I've had moments like that too, growing up by Chicago, Lake Michigan, seeing the beauty of Lake Michigan, which is like, Great Lake, it's like an ocean. Not exactly the same, but, you have those personal connections. It's really cool. Can you walk us through the early days? How did Coral Vita go from an idea to this globally recognized impact venture? What was the turning point of that?
So my background coming out of college, I was more in the policy space, NGOs. I worked for my friend's NGO in Mauritius, small island nation in the Indian Ocean. It was called Eli Africa. I did environmental education work for at-risk kids. Reforestation is where I first did coral farming as well, with funding from the United Nations. I had opportunities to work on climate adaptation policy at the White House, as well as for a coalition of island nation governments. So there was this experience of how we can really affect positive change in the world and hopefully, enjoy waking up and going to work too. But I also definitely felt some frustrations within those spaces, whether it was bureaucratic inertia in government and the policymaking world, along with all the handicaps that exist for NGOs, from funders, philanthropy, really scaling the amount of impact we want to see.
Yeah.
I was in grad school after going to my year in Mauritius. I was at the Yale School of the Environment, getting my master's degree, and met and became friends with my classmate, Gator Halpern, which is really his name.
Yeah.
It's a great name for a coral farmer, to be
Yes,
sure.
it is. That's right.
And so Gator was coming more from academia, environmental science. He likes to say he
Oh,
felt he was writing the obituary of the planet. So with a tremendous amount of respect for those
yeah.
fields, but still just personally feeling, restricted within them, we were thinking about, well, maybe a business could solve for a lot of these environmental challenges that matter and matter to us in ways that government, NGOs, researchers couldn't. And so you sort of
Yeah.
take a step back from the magic, the wonder, the beauty of coral reefs. They're actually one of the most valuable ecosystems on planet Earth. The latest
Yeah.
estimates are they generate $2.7 trillion a year. They power tourism economies, protect coastlines from storms. There are medicines on the market fighting cancer,
Yeah.
arthritis, viral infections that come from coral reef organisms.
Yeah.
A billion people, a quarter of marine life, all depends on this one single ecosystem.
Wow.
Half of them have died since the 70s. Over 90% are on track to die by 2050. We have
Wow.
to stop killing coral reefs, but we also need to scale solutions for adaptation. And that's where this
Yeah.
field of coral restoration exists. And I had that experience in Mauritius doing coral farming in sort of a traditional NGO, grant funded, low tech model.
Wow.
Gator and I sort of vibed around that experience, thought, what if we could team up with leading scientists to use their methods and then put a business model on top of it to scale speed and impact? And we got $1,000 grant from university back in 2014, and
Yeah.
we have taken that for quite a ride.
Amazing. Cool story, and talk about, love of a space with viability of a model and a solution to a big problem at scale. Very cool, and it's
Nice.
underserved and radically different, but so important now more than ever. I think that kind of sums it up. I mean, it's so needed. Um, so we understand, all of us, right, listeners, myself, what exactly does land-based coral farming mean, and how is it different from traditional reef restoration methods? What is the difference between the two?
So the main ways people grow corals are in underwater ocean nurseries and land-based coral farms.
Hmm.
For how you even can imagine growing a coral, if people can imagine taking a cutting off of a tree or a flower,
Yeah.
you graft it, it grows. So
Hmm.
corals, you can basically take a similar principle. You take off pieces of living coral from on the reefs and you grow them in these facilities and then ultimately outplant them back out into the reefs.
Yeah.
Corals also make babies, kind of akin to pollination. It usually only happens after the full moon once a year. I
Wow.
highly recommend Safe for Work videos, often narrated by David Attenborough, seeing this pretty
Yeah.
otherworldly process. But with
Amazing.
the coral farming that we mainly focus on, traditionally people use underwater nurseries. When I lived in
Mm.
Mauritius, that's what we did with that United Nations grant. It's a
Wow.
lovely day at the office. You basically have sort of ropes attached to PVC pipes
Wow.
or metal frames, and the corals sort of grow on them until they're mature enough to get planted in the reefs. But
Wow.
most of the time, those projects, they only use a very small subset of coral species. There's some corals that can grow from the size of your thumb to your hand and wrist to 6 to 12 months. But
Wow.
many others, most others, to grow from the size of your fingernail to your whole hand could take 20, 50, 100 years.
Yeah. Long time. Yeah. Of
Being an incredibly and really impractically long time for most
course.
restoration efforts. You can't really toughen up the corals against things that are killing them, namely things like warming oceans.
Right.
Setting up and maintaining an underwater garden at every reef that needs to be restored around the world isn't practical. Then, for those who haven't had the joy of going through the UN grant process, I'm still
Mm.
incredibly grateful for that opportunity. And
Yeah.
also, that model is insufficient. We got $50,000 to grow a few thousand corals once, which was
Yeah.
amazing working with those local communities, but then the funding ran out and that was the end of the
Yeah.
project. So land-based coral farms, together then with the business model, which I'll talk about later,
Yeah.
are these high-tech aquaculture parks. We're pumping
Mm.
seawater through tanks. It lets us change the conditions in which the corals are growing in. Basically, we can give them the spa treatment to make them grow fast
Mm.
or be healthy, or take them to the gym, mimic
Wow.
future ocean conditions and stress harden them, supply an entire nation's or region's reefs from a single centralized facility, use
Wow.
all these other methods, and then ultimately make it more affordable to do restoration, while then also we've got patented technologies with machine learning and computer vision and all sorts of cool stuff that we integrate in.
Very
So
cool.
our approach then is,
Mm.
basically high tech and then financially sustainable to then achieve greater levels of impact in the ocean.
Very, very cool. Yeah. Wow. What a process. How does Coral Vita's work integrate climate resilience into coral restoration?
So I was just touching on the
Yeah.
land-based farms giving us some capabilities and the way in
Yeah.
which we can integrate our model in for enhancing corals resilience to threats like climate change, namely is this high-tech aquaculture system.
Yeah.
So there's a field of science known as assisted evolution. There's
Mm.
amazing coral restoration practitioners all around the world. We are not in this alone.
Yeah.
There are people that have been doing this for decades, and many of them in the scientific field in particular are thinking about how can we help corals better survive warming oceans.
Yeah.
And there's CRISPR gene editing technology. There's reflective UV slicks to help with sun rays being
Yeah.
bounced away from the reefs in really hot months. What we're focused on is basically thermal stress hardening. Corals have a
Mm.
natural ability to adapt.
Hmm.
It's just getting so bad so quickly they can't keep up. So we're basically accelerating nature's processes almost in a sort of selective breeding sense. We can raise the temperatures in our tanks the corals are growing in, bring them back down, raise the temperatures,
Mm.
bring them back down, identify which coral genotypes are naturally more resilient,
Hmm.
boost resilience in all the corals that we're growing, crossbreed those corals together. I talked earlier about
Wow.
coral baby making. So
Yeah.
put on some Marvin Gaye, put the corals that are tougher in the mood. But all that comes together so that when
Yeah.
we outplant those corals, they have a better chance of surviving. Because just like human beings, right? If
Yeah.
body temperature gets too high, you get a fever, you get sick, maybe
Yeah.
even worse. If it gets
Yeah.
too hot in the ocean, that is one of the main stressors that has caused up to this point since the 1970s, half of the
Wow.
world's reefs to die and many more to come. So
Wow.
ensuring that the corals have a better chance of survival is key for our work and for the entire field and the future of coral reefs.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's of great, great importance. You've underscored that. And I think, having groups, institutions, NGOs, as you said, governments, private sector getting involved in this, this is a huge priority. The prioritization, the hierarchy of prioritization, probably isn't there as it should be. So that's why I'm so glad that you guys are working on this. You're really, you're on the cusp of what's to come, what should be coming, and definitely vital, as in your name. So Coral Vita, the root of vital, but very exciting. So you talked about growing corals, exponentially faster, maybe 50 times faster. What's the science behind that? How does that play a role on the science side?
So just like there's this field of assisted evolution pioneered
Yeah.
by one of our original advisors, Dr. Ruth Gates, to help toughen corals' resilience to climate change threats. One of our other original advisors, Dr. David Vaughan, helped pioneer this open source field of science called microfragmenting.
Mm.
Basically, almost imagine scar tissue.
Hmm.
Corals are animals.
Hmm.
They have plants living inside of them that make rock
Wow.
for their skeleton. It's a pretty cool 3-for-1.
Wow.
They're colonial organisms. So when you look at one giant piece of coral, it's one animal, but each one of these tiny little polyps, they're genetic copies, they're clones of each other, and they sort of grow
Wow.
from 1 into 40 into 4,000 over time.
Wow.
If you cut up a colony and put the fragments and the microfragments near each other, they sort of space them apart, it triggers a natural healing process, and the
Wow.
corals will fuse back into themselves. So earlier I mentioned a lot of restoration projects only grow the branching species. This means that the bouldering and crusting, plating corals, which make up the majority of species around the world that help protect coastlines from storms, that act as fish habitat alongside the branching ones, we can now grow them in months and years instead of decades
Wow.
and centuries. So, in addition to
Incredible.
obviously bringing down the costs, it allows us to do much more holistic and impactful restoration. It's really exciting. And it's, again, harnessing a natural process that the corals have themselves.
Truly incredible. Yeah, it's looking at real world results and outputs and outcomes. Are there reefs today that are thriving thanks to Coral Vita right now in this moment? Where are you guys at in your process as an organization?
So we are about 10 years in all. We
Yeah.
really became operational in 2019 when we
Okay.
launched our first coral farm in Freeport, Grand Bahama.
Yeah.
3 months later, we got hit by Hurricane Dorian, which was the strongest storm in recorded history to hit the country. I was there for. I don't recommend staying for a Cat 5.
No, I
Um,
don't either.
it was obviously untold damage to our
Yeah.
communities and people all around us. The farm
Yeah.
also got hit by an 18-foot wall of water. So
Wow.
after doing a few months of rescue and relief work, we got back to rebuilding the farm to get towards restoration. Reopened the farm in March 2020, just in time for COVID. So there's the sort of classic startup roller coaster journeys, and then you throw in a few extras in between for us. So we've really been going in earnest since then as far as growing and outplanting reefs. Is it an absolute game changer at this point to say, there's all the Bahamas reefs are alive thanks to us? Absolutely not. Not going to take that kind of credit. We're not at the level of scale yet. But we have seen really exciting and important levels of impact from our work. We always measure before and after what the conditions were on the reefs. So we've seen coral survivorship ranging from 30 to 77 to 84 to 98% across some of our restoration sites in the Bahamas. For context, most restoration projects in the Caribbean, if you have 30 to 50% after 1 year, is considered a successful project. So our worst project was still successful. We had twofold increases in fish life populations. We've seen really meaningful figures, and just forget about figures, being in the water and seeing more life coming back to these places. So from the Bahamas, we're now actually working in Dubai. We've partnered with Saudi's leading university, the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, and are doing work on the Red Sea. And we're having raised a pre-seed in the seed round, Series A level company now, which to my knowledge is the first ever for a coral restoration organization. We've got patented tech. And we've got a really exciting road ahead of us as we look to expand our pipeline and scale restoration in partnership with not only the private sector and governments, but other restoration organizations, local communities, scientists all around the world, because this is what we got to do to keep reefs alive for the future.
It's incredible. You're really, you're taking the lead in this space. And I think it's so utterly important that we do, and again, if our listeners could take anything away, it's the level of impact that's needed in this specific space, that affects each and every one of us directly and indirectly. It's incredible.
It's true. A lot of times we think about the environment as sort of being this own thing, and it's sort of, you look at polling, it's like the economy, public health, security, and then like the environment. And when you think about the ocean, it's really out of sight, out of mind. The truth of the matter is the environment, in addition to being, amazing and something people should connect with, it's part of economic prosperity. It's part of public health. It's part of national security. If you've got 90% of the world's reefs dead by 2050 and a billion people rely on them, that's a lot of refugees. If your homes are in, the Florida Keys along the coast and those reefs act like a seawall, you're getting protection from erosion and storm surge. If you've got a family member that's battling cancer, the drug that might be helping them could have come from coral reef organisms, on top of all the other reasons that matter. So this idea is, if we invest in the ecosystems that sustain us all, we create good local jobs in these places that then have a win-win-win impact for hopefully really everyone, in addition to, of course, nature and biodiversity too.
It's so fascinating you brought up the extendability of impact around coral reefs, because most people think about this in terms of, climatically, how does this affect each and every one of us? But economically, in terms of your own, health and wellness and well-being as it relates to pharmaceuticals that are, coming from and derived from these, agents associated with coral reefs. So it's so interesting that you bring that up. That's not talked about, but it should be. It should be talked about because it impacts every one of us. So I'm glad you're bringing this front and center. And it sounds like your measurement of success isn't always just scientific, but it relates to community, climate, ecosystem health, all those components. And then there's the climatic scientific aspect of this too.
Yeah, we have a community-based approach to our model too. So wherever we work, we sort of focus on workforce development, hire locally as much as possible in the Bahamas. The majority of our staff are Bahamian. We partner with local NGOs. That facility is sort of provided in-kind space for Waterkeepers Bahamas and the Blue Action Lab to do a mangrove restoration project. The farms not only are coral production centers and revenue-generating tourism attractions, but also marine education centers for 6-year-olds to 86-year-old students, fishers, government officials. So and like you sort of said, the communities, the businesses, the government, science, all of it is sort of woven up. And we really feel there's this opportunity to kind of galvanize a restoration economy that can take care of the ecosystems that in turn take care of all of us. Because at the end of the day, humanity relies on healthy nature a lot more than nature relies on humanity.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. When we think about policy, it's an interesting word, right? Policy that informs and guides, the public sector and also the private sector, right? What policy changes, if you could wave a wand, so to speak, what policy changes or global initiatives, not just domestically, but globally, would you like to see to better support reef restoration at a scale where it can create even more impact?
Well, I don't want to take up the whole rest of the podcast with that question because I could certainly
Yeah,
list
go on and on.
a number of things there, but
Yeah.
there's two different ways of thinking about it. One, I'll sort of address directly restoration, but then also by leading that saying coral restoration is essential and it's not a silver bullet. And we have to stop killing coral reefs. It's just like we need to stop deforestation while scaling reforestation. You can't just say, well, we can plant our way out of this while continuing to trash things through climate change, pollution, overfishing. So there's the policy changes that need to happen to achieve net zero and decarbonization. And as someone that eats seafood, there's good ways to fish. There's really harmful ways to fish.
Oh, yeah.
We should not be dumping toxic pollution into the ocean, not only because obviously it's going to help harm coral reefs, but you could look at places like Florida where red tides have impacted individuals' health and caused massive loss of dollars from, people can't go to the beach and how that affects tourism. So there's all the policies for basically mitigation. And then on the adaptation resilience side, interestingly enough, in today's days in the United States, coral restoration is actually one of those few things that has bipartisan support. So how can we look at harnessing the power of ecosystem restoration through whether it's sort of streamlined regulations and policies so that you can more actively deploy good projects for restoration to this world of conservation finance? So we didn't really talk about the business model yet as far as how we target different customers that rely on the benefits reefs provide. And we can get there, but there's also this world where we all sort of know about carbon credits. They're actually coming soon, basically, are biodiversity credits. It's great about carbon negative. It's how do you be nature positive? There are blue bonds, debt for nature swaps, coral restoration insurance policies. Could private sector entities that pay for ecosystem restoration see some form of credit or reductions on their tax bills, or just getting creative to think about, okay, how do we incentivize the massive pools of capital that exist but aren't actually effectively getting deployed to then really put things to work? Because an argument that often gets made is there's not enough money out there. There's plenty of money out there. It's thinking about how can we actually put it into action to then reap the benefits. There's been studies that have shown that for every dollar that gets put into ecosystem restoration, so that's inclusive but beyond corals, mangroves, seagrass, oysters, every $1 you invest in, there's $5 in benefits.
Wow.
That's a bankable solution. So let's figure out how we can put those policies into play to scale not just Coral Vita's work, but other people doing coral restoration and all these other forms of ecosystem regeneration.
Sounds very beneficial, and at scale for a lot of different organizations, public side, private side, and I guess that brings me to a question. Why is Coral Vita a for-profit social enterprise? Why did you choose that model over a nonprofit structure? What allowed you to say, this is the best path forward at this point? Just to understand more of that.
My co-founder Gator and I were very conscious about creating Coral Vita as a for-profit, and ultimately a sort of for-profit, for nature, for good. There's a lot of other businesses we could have started to just make as much money as possible. And as someone coming from the NGO and policy world, again, with a great amount of respect for those spaces and for researchers, when I had that experience in Mauritius, it was just clear, among many other reasons, there's so many handicaps on nonprofits, where donors want to see their dollars go to or not. People not really able to afford to live in many cases in order to try and do good for the world, because donors don't want to see money going towards overhead and salaries, or having to scrape by in order to get enough materials to do the physical work. So I could kind of keep going on about what's broken in the NGO and philanthropy world, but that at least informed this idea of, okay, well, if we can harness the power of capitalism for good, generate revenue streams that then the dollars can go back into outplanting more corals instead of a grant here and a fundraiser gala there, we're going to actually be able to achieve much more impact. So our original thesis was going back to the 2.7 trillion generated by reefs through tourism, coastal protection, fisheries. We, as Coral Vita, sell restoration as a service to hotels, developers, governments, insurers, cruise lines, port authorities, anyone that depends on the value reefs provide. While our farms, then on a daily basis, just like people pay to visit an aquarium, our farms are fun, dynamic. People pay to visit them. They can adopt corals, whether it's on an individual level or the Corona Beer Reef that we restored, working with sort of nature positive brands. And then from there, we've also developed tech that we use internally to have better outcomes and lower costs while then licensing that to other restoration stakeholders. And now we're also doing coral relocation projects, recognizing that there are times when coastal development is going to happen and we can offer a more coral health positive solution to traditional players when it comes to moving those corals out of impact zones and hopefully then funding, again, additional restoration work. You take all those things together, again, generating millions of dollars and hopefully ultimately tens and hundreds of millions of dollars a year that will then result in more corals in the ocean, providing all the benefits that we've talked about. That was our thought about, okay, maybe let's try and do this as a for-profit, have something that maybe could be transformative, and then ultimately pour more money, not just into Coral Vita's coffers to do the work, but really into the whole space of ecosystem restoration by showcasing you can do a for-profit approach. That usually will then get more people piling on when it comes to investment and customer dollars.
Yeah, for profit, for purpose. It's very impact driven, I think. And what does success look like for you guys? As we think about the profit piece, as we think about the purpose piece, what are you chasing? Matthew McConaughey is chasing greatness. What are you guys chasing? What does that look like for you at a larger scale globally? And that could also dip into technologies, other locations. How does that intersect with profit and purpose?
Well, I never thought about this before. When you shouted out McConaughey, I just thought, all reef, all reef, all reef.
It's a good one. You've got your next spokesperson there, Yeah.
Matthew, give me a call, man. There's plenty of puns when it comes to the ocean world. I mean, ultimately, I hope we'll put out a business because we're fine, or reefs are good and we don't need to do the work anymore. We're obviously not heading in that direction. So then the next tier down is that we've sort of helped galvanize this restoration economy. And that every nation on earth, every country and territory, which is about 100, that has coral reefs, has large scale commercial land-based coral farms, whether they're owned and operated by us, whether they're sort of franchises or partnerships, whether it's our technology powering other people's work. But that we have achieved the level of scale, financial durability, and impact to then really do massive projects and ensure that as our leaders in government, business, finance, the media figure out how to stop killing coral reefs, we can seed them for the future with more resilient corals to then, hopefully start recovering on their own. And if we're really successful, maybe there's Coastal Vita, we're doing mangrove or seagrass restoration. We're all about partnerships and collaborations. We're not at all thinking that we can or should do this alone. Bringing in technologists, I mentioned before, we've got our own patented tech, so diving deeper into that, investing more in the brand and the storytelling, using our work planting coral as something that's a fun educational tool to get more people on Team Coral and protecting them to begin with. And then again, I could keep going, but there's this idea that we really can, have a transformative level of impact. And there's a number of people thinking about terraforming other planets. How about we terraform Earth for good, keep it stable and habitable so that, we all can survive and thrive. Because again, a world without coral reefs, a world without healthy ecosystems is tragic. And it's also going to cause some pretty serious socioeconomic catastrophe. So our ultimate vision is not only to prevent that, but to create worlds of opportunities that can create more good in the world.
It's incredible. Everybody always thinks about, a lot of people do now. We won't mention names, but select figures talk about leaving the planet, exploration, very cool idea sets, yes. But think about the things that we haven't discovered yet and the things we can solve here. And this really touches on that same idea. How do
we know more about deep space than we do about the vast majority of the ocean here. And I mean, look, I love space. Don't get me wrong. I'm all for interplanetary travel and
Yeah.
exploration out there. And also, I feel like the closest I'll get to being an astronaut is throwing on a scuba suit, going
Yeah.
underwater, being zero G, and then there's this incredible alien world right off the shore in many places. And it's something I hope a lot of people get to experience. And
It's really
ultimately,
cool.
because they get to experience it, they help protect it.
It's really neat. It becomes, very personal, which is impactful to say the least. When it affects you at your core and you can experience that yourself as an individual, then it becomes more of a collective. It has that collective velocity, which is really cool.
Mhm.
You mentioned the word resilience. Being resilient. What has leading this mission-driven startup taught you about resilience, both ecologically, but also we touched on personally. How has it affected you?
Well, that's an interesting question. It's deeply affected me. I'll start
Yeah.
by saying that. Every startup founder and most people on Earth will have their own tales of resilience and being put through the ringer and figuring out how to grow and build and get back on the horse and move forward from it.
Yep.
I referenced earlier, right? Going from a Cat 5 hurricane where 80% of our island was underwater. People we knew
Wow.
were losing their homes all
Mm.
around us, and our farm got wiped out. And,
Wow.
doing rescue and relief work through a global pandemic, through
Mm.
the joys of, island time and having to navigate, doing this kind of work in
Yeah.
countries that don't always streamline the processes to then just also, working with a team, working with people around you, working with local communities. And then I think
Yeah.
also that's really one of the keys for resilience is who you can surround yourself with
Yep.
to then help recharge, to help grow, to help shift your perspectives. I'm very lucky, not only through Gator and the whole Coral
Yeah.
Vita team, from the executive team all the way down to the interns, but to our partners in the coral restoration community we've been working with for years. My wife Courtney and I recently became a father a few months
Oh,
ago.
awesome. Yeah.
So my daughter Noah and our dog Panda and just all
Yep.
the things in life, and then also just being able to go out to the corals themselves,
Yeah.
and be in nature and know what I'm fighting for.
Yep.
I think those are just a number of ways in which I've we've gotten we've gotten knocked around quite a few times, but there's
Mm.
ways to really, I think, harness that to then hopefully do better and be better.
To reference Chumbawamba, I get knocked down, but I get up again, right? So that's the goal, right?
I don't normally not reference this
Yeah.
in any
Yeah.
interview, but my AOL screen name when I was a kid was Mad Cow Stew, which was a random line in a
Yeah.
different Chumbawamba song.
There you go.
So yeah, I didn't think we'd be talking about Chumbawamba on this call, but
Chumbawamba.
they're in there deep for me.
Who knew? Who knew Chumbawamba would make an appearance, but they did. So we're here, and that's that. Yeah. Talking about vision for Coral Vita 5 to 10 years from now, no one can predict the future, right? We don't know what it looks like. We have idea sets, we have projections, we have goals, we have aspirations. But if you were to say, this is where we'd like to be, and as Coral Vita, but also for the future of reef ecosystems globally, what would you want to see happen? What would be more of a utopian scenario for Coral Vita and, the world of reef ecosystems?
Well, I'm going to phrase it a little bit differently. Someone referenced the concept of protopian last year. My friend Ari Wallach, and it's this idea that there's, call it optimistic realism as opposed to just pure idealism and utopianism. So I'm all for utopia, but also like how do we actually, what can we see mapping ourselves out to the future? So
yes.
Yeah, I sort of reference, we've got more farms launching in more places. We're showcasing how our revenue model is working. More investors are joining now. Maybe that means we're raising a Series B or a Series C. Maybe we've exited, maybe we got acquired, maybe we stayed private, but we're doing so well that we can just continue on the work. And like I mentioned before, through science, through R&D, and then through other revenue streams, we're helping regenerate other ecosystems like mangrove forests and the like. Those are all things I could see possible, but hopefully we've not only continued to make the impact in the water and in the communities, but then been that showcase so many other people will start. And it doesn't have to be a for-profit. It could be an NGO. It could be a community-led group. It could be a policy change But then more people are stepping in to participate in this
Yeah.
space. And that also, as I mentioned before, our policy leaders, our business leaders, our finance leaders, our media leaders recognize we have a narrowing window, but an important one where we can decisively act to stop killing coral reefs and these
Yeah.
ecosystems because we have to. And the consequences are going to be severe. And the cost of inaction is a lot higher than the cost of acting
Yeah.
today. That's something I'm definitely hopeful for, while
Cool.
also being realistic about the world we're in today and what's possible.
100%. Do you feel like there's a misunderstanding from people or a lack of knowledge around coral reefs and ocean conservation today with most people, alive who, locally, domestically, globally, they just don't know enough. They don't know what you're sharing today. Do you feel like it's just not, the awareness isn't there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is why education is so important. And we do try to, as we're running a business, whether it's by people visiting the farms or doing things digitally, whether it's podcast interviews or digital campaigns, or, when we had Corona Beer sponsor a restoration project, they took out digital billboards in London and full
Awesome.
page ads in the Guardian newspaper. So storytelling is huge for education because most people think corals are a pretty rock, let alone that it's a living organism, and then that
Right.
it's something that's nice that's out in the ocean. Oh, it's actually
Mm.
this huge economic engine. It's something that you want a nice seafood dinner on your plate. You're worried about refugees. You want to go on a beach vacation. Your local community member whose livelihood depends on it. I mean, there's definitely places where people live in these areas and they might not even recognize how much they rely on healthy coral reefs. So, yes, that's a huge challenge, and also I think an exciting opportunity that
Yeah.
we're looking to tap into to drive more positive action.
Incredible. So if I'm listening in today to Becoming Radical and I'm listening to your story, your journey, what you guys are doing to create this profit with purpose and impact at scale, very exciting stuff, right? What advice would you give to me as a listener at Becoming Radical? Let's call it the rules of becoming radical to tackle big environmental challenges, specifically in this space or something like it.
Well, I think the first way for becoming radical in this space is just go out and enjoy nature. If you're lucky
Yeah.
enough to be able to snorkel or scuba dive,
Yeah.
go for that. But it also can just be, going into your local forest or park, or just really, experience the wonderful world we have. I think it's a blessing. It
Yeah.
feels good. And then I
Yeah.
think you can help really develop that connection. I mentioned before, you don't have to go out and start a company, but
Yeah.
what are the ways that you can vote with your wallet, vote at the ballot box, support leaders who are solving these problems to begin with. You got friends that are working in the space, definitely buck them up.
Mm.
Go, there's plenty of content that's out there. There's whether it's great social media accounts or amazing documentary series like Chasing Coral is one, which I
Oh,
think
yeah.
you don't even need to have a Netflix account. I think it's free on YouTube now. Just sort of
Awesome.
familiarize with it, so then you can also be an advocate. Obviously, if you want to come visit our coral farms, you're more than welcome. It's not a bad reason to go to the Bahamas.
No.
If you're not able to do that, but you still want to figure out how to support us from afar, if you go to our website, we have a whole Adopt a Coral program. But more importantly, I think it really is this idea of educating, becoming aware, becoming an advocate and an ally, so that we can then collectively, help out coral reefs and these other ecosystems.
That's really cool. Do you guys have a mechanism for people to do like, San Diego Zoo has a live cam. Our son watches the koalas. He's almost 7. He loves those koalas. We haven't seen them yet. He's excited for it. Do you have a mechanism to see the coral reef farms and what you guys are up to on location right now where somebody can tune in virtually?
Like a coral cam?
Yeah, Coral Cam. There you go.
It's a good idea.
Yeah.
We don't currently have one active. It's something we're thinking about. I can definitely recommend other organizations. There's actually, I think I'm going to get the name of the organization wrong, but there's a coral cam in Miami run by some great people where
Nice.
it's a underwater camera at a reef where you can see fish zooming past.
Cool.
So there's definitely things that people can go on online. We have our social media accounts where people can follow along with our work, but I'm definitely going to think about sticking a camera now in our tanks
There
for
you
the
go.
corals.
Yeah,
I love corals. I'm not gonna say a coral bubbling in a tank is quite as exciting as a koala, but everything counts.
So we have Matthew McConaughey, all reef. Hopefully, let's hope so. He's going to contact, right? We have Chumbawamba. Now we have Coral Cams. I mean, we're on our way. We've come up with a lot of ideas in this podcast. So
yes, we have. It's a good stint right here.
Things are happening, man. So let me ask you, where can everybody find you? We talked about your website. Can you list that out for us? Anywhere they can access you, they can find you personally, they can follow you, cheer you on. What does that look like?
So our website is www.coralvita.co, not .com. That's an Eastern European cosmetics manufacturer.
Yeah.
Social media across Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all that kind of stuff, at Coral Vita Reefs. And obviously, you can come visit us in person. We have the Coral Farm in Grand Bahama. We have a facility currently in Dubai, and we're looking to expand to more places around the world. We're already doing work in Saudi Arabia, Caribbean island, Saba. So if you get the chance to come visit us in person, please do. But digitally, those are the ways you can access us. There's also plenty of content out there online. A few years ago, also, we were very lucky enough to win an incredible award. Prince William started this initiative called the Earthshot Prize, which is looking to spotlight and galvanize environmental solutions around the world. So we were actually the first winners of the Revive Our Oceans Earthshot Prize. And so through that has come a ton of stuff online with partners like Bloomberg, Salesforce, a number of press hits about us across the interweb. So there's plenty of ways that people can find us and engage with us. But again, hopefully can actually get in the water and plant some corals with us too.
That's amazing. Very, very cool. Well, you are becoming radical. We will be following you, cheering you on. Hope to have you back on the show. Talk about all new things happening, whatever that is, from Matthew McConaughey to Chumbawamba to Coral Cams to pre-IPOs or exits and acquisitions. We're excited. I think this has been a great podcast and wish you all the best and excited to have our listeners learn more. Everything will be in the show notes today so they can follow along, and we'll be talking soon. So thank you again. Really appreciate it, Sam.
Thanks, Michael. See you on the reefs.
All right. Love it. Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Becoming Radical. If today's episode sparked something in you, follow wherever you listen, join the conversation, and share it with someone ready to think beyond limits. Be unlimited, be bold, and become radical. See you next time.
Game over.